A single father like you? This letter is a forgery. Hawthorne isn't for people like you.
Please, just call the district office and check.
Security! We have a man here using fake documents!
Call your supervisor. Do it before we walk out that door. This will be the most expensive mistake of your career.
Daddy, what did I do wrong?
Are you threatening me?
Mr. Bennett? Sir?
Who was I really? If stories about ordinary people standing up to injustice are the kind you love, take a second right now to subscribe and follow the channel, because the way this one turned out is something you'll want to see all the way through. My name is Marcus Bennett, and for the last 6 years I have raised my daughter Lily alone. Her mother left when Lily was 2, chasing a new life with a new man in a city I have never bothered to visit. I do not talk about that morning much. What matters is the mornings that came after, thousands of them, each one starting the same way in our small house on the edge of Maple Hollow. On the morning everything changed, I cut Lily's toast into the shape of a star, because she had decided, at 8 years old, that she was going to be an astronomer. Her homework was still taped to the refrigerator where I could check it, and my coat hung over the back of the kitchen chair the way it had for nearly 10 years. To anyone watching, I was an ordinary man in an old sedan, driving his daughter to school with nothing remarkable about him at all. That was exactly how I wanted it. What none of my neighbors knew, what Lily herself did not know, was that I had founded the Bennett Education Foundation. It managed billions of dollars, and over the years it had quietly given hundreds of millions to schools, libraries, and programs for children who started life with nothing. I had built something enormous, and I had spent just as much effort making sure no one could see my hand in it. There was a reason I hid it, and it had nothing to do with modesty. I grew up poor, the son of a school janitor, and when I was a boy, a fine private academy turned me away because of what my father did for a living. I never forgot the way the receptionist looked at his uniform. So I made a promise to myself that my daughter would be judged by her mind and her kindness, never by the name on a check. I wanted Lily to believe that money and status do not make one person worth more than another. That belief was why we were driving to Hawthorne Preparatory Academy, like any ordinary family that day. Lily had earned her place there entirely on her own. She had taken the entrance exam, sat through the interview, and scored high enough that the district admissions office mailed us an official acceptance letter, which she now clutched in both hands in the passenger seat as though it might fly away. "They have a telescope on the roof, Daddy," she told me for the 3rd time. "A real one, and an astronomy club that meets on Fridays." "I know, sweetheart," I said, smiling at the road. "You've mentioned it once or twice." She loved Hawthorne for its science labs, its enormous library, and that astronomy club she had dreamed about for a year. What she did not know, what I would never tell her, was that most of the school's new science wing had been built with money from my foundation. She was about to walk proudly into a building I had quietly paid for, and she thought of it only as the place where her future was waiting. There was one more thing she did not know. My phone buzzed as we pulled into the lot, and I glanced at the message. Dr. Gerald Hartman, the superintendent of the Maple Hollow district, had confirmed a 10 o'clock meeting at Hawthorne that very morning. We were finalizing a partnership worth $120 million, money meant to expand Hawthorne, build new schools, and create thousands of scholarships for children of single parents. The meeting was private, kept quiet to avoid the press before the contract was signed. My plan was simple. Finish Lily's enrollment as an ordinary parent, walk her out to the car, and then meet Hartman for the signing without anyone connecting the tired man in the old coat to the name on the agreement. For the two of us, this was just a simple morning. Hand in the paperwork, tour a classroom, then drive to the bookstore for school supplies. I had no idea how quickly a simple morning could come apart. Inside, the lobby of Hawthorne was all high glass windows and polished stone, the kind of place where footsteps echoed and the air smelled faintly of floor wax. Wealthy parents moved through it in expensive coats, their children in crisp new uniforms, and the staff greeted every one of them within seconds. Lily and I stepped up to the reception area and waited. The counter was not busy, and yet no one seemed to see us at all. Lily tugged my sleeve and looked up at me with those wide, honest eyes. "Daddy, why isn't anybody helping us?" "Be patient, honey," I told her gently. "Let's not think badly of people before we give them a chance." I had spent my whole life teaching her that, and I still believed it, even standing there feeling invisible. Finally, a young admissions clerk waved us forward. Her nameplate read Rachel Doyle, and she could not have been more than a few years out of school herself. I handed over everything: the acceptance letter, Lily's birth certificate, our proof of residence, her transcripts, all of it already reviewed and approved by the district office. Rachel scanned the file code, and I watched her face brighten. "Lily Bennett," she said, reading her screen. "Approved status right here in the system, and these exam scores are—" She caught herself, glancing up at Lily with a real smile. "These are wonderful. Congratulations." I felt myself relax for the first time all morning. But then Rachel hesitated, her hand hovering over the keyboard. She explained, almost apologetically, that files with scores this high needed a final signature from the principal. It was a school rule, nothing more. She reached for the phone to call the principal's office, a small act of pure goodwill, and without knowing it, she lit the fuse. Principal Diane Prescott came out of her office a moment later, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop. Her eyes moved over me the way a person inspects something that has been left in the wrong place. They traveled from my worn coat down to my scuffed shoes, then out the window to my old sedan sitting among the luxury cars in the lot. She had not looked at the file even once. She had already looked at me and decided. I understood later why she felt so certain of herself. The year before, Hawthorne had been embarrassed by a family that used a false address to slip a child across district lines. The local paper covered it, and the board reprimanded her personally. Since then, she had told herself that she was the guardian of the school standards, and she genuinely believed it. That was what made her dangerous. Her prejudice wore the clean, respectable coat of duty, and in her own mind, she was never the villain of the story. "And what is it you do for a living, Mr. Bennett?" she asked, though I had not offered the question. "What part of town are you in? These programs carry additional fees, you understand, considerable ones." I kept my voice even. "Hawthorne is a public school in this district, and Lily's file was approved on merit. If there's any doubt, I'd ask you to check the confirmation code or simply call the central admissions office. They'll clear it up in a minute." Diane did not touch the phone. Instead, she straightened, folding her hands, and spoke loudly enough for the parents nearby to hear. "Hawthorne has certain standards, and families who don't quite fit them have a habit of using false addresses, forged papers, that sort of thing. We've learned to be careful." "Her code is valid," Rachel said quickly from the desk. "I'm looking at it. The district already approved." "Return to your station, Miss Doyle," Diane cut in, without even turning her head. By now, a few parents had drifted closer, sensing something worth watching. One of them lifted the phone and began to record, not out of any cruelty, but because that is simply what people do now when tension fills a room. A tall man in a gray overcoat, a father named Bradley Vance, muttered just loud enough to be heard. Wouldn't be the first time somebody dragged a kid along to make a scam look real. A couple of heads nodded at that. I've seen it before. The way a single ugly suggestion can become the frame through which a crowd sees everything after. Once Bradley gave them permission to suspect me, every calm word I spoke would be read as the smooth talk of a con man, and every protective instinct as a threat. And Lily heard all of it. I felt her small hand tighten around mine, and when I glanced down, the bright excitement that had filled her all morning was draining out of her face, replaced by something I had spent 8 years trying to protect her from. Confusion first, and then a flush of shame that she was far too young to carry. I tried once more. I held out the acceptance letter, the one bearing the district office's electronic signature, and I kept my tone as reasonable as I could manage. Please, before you decide anything, just call and verify this. That's all I'm asking. Something about my steadiness seemed to offend her more than shouting ever could. I think, standing there in front of watching parents, she felt her authority being questioned, and she needed to win to prove to herself that she had been right all along. This could easily be forged, she announced. Then she did something I will never forget. She snatched the file out of my hands, took a stamp from the counter, and pressed the word "rejected" across the front page in thick red ink. She dropped the whole stack of papers onto the counter in front of my daughter and said, "Hawthorne simply isn't the place for families like yours. There are other schools better suited to your situation." Lily stared at the rejected file, at the red word stamped over her own name, and then she looked up at me. "Daddy?" she asked in a small voice. "Did I do something wrong?" I knelt down right there on the polished stone floor so that I was level with her eyes, and I held both her shoulders. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. Nothing at all. Do you understand me?" She nodded, but I could see she did not believe it, and that was the thing that finally made my own calm begin to crack. I stood back up and asked Diane, plainly, to restore the file and to call the district office. She treated the request as a threat to her authority. She picked up the phone at last, but not to verify anything. She called security instead, reporting that a parent was using fraudulent documents, causing a disturbance, and refusing to leave the premises. The guard who came was a heavy-set older man named Frank Dolan. I could see in his face that he knew something was off. I had not raised my voice once, I had made no sudden movement, and everything about me contradicted the emergency he had been called to handle. But the order came straight from the principal, and I would learn later that Frank was raising kids of his own and could not afford to lose this job. So he hesitated, and then he did as he was told. For Lily's sake, I did not resist him. But before he could lead us away, I looked Diane Prescott directly in the eye and spoke quietly. "You should call your supervisor before we walk through that door. This may be the most expensive mistake of your career." She laughed, certain I was bluffing with connections that did not exist. Frank's hand settled on my shoulder, and he began to guide my daughter and me towards the exit. Frank Dolan walked us down the long corridor toward the front doors, one hand resting on my shoulder, and I concentrated on keeping my steps slow and my face calm. Lily was pressed against my side, and I could feel her whole body trembling. She looked up at the guard and began to plead with him in that high, breaking voice that only a frightened child has. "Please don't take my daddy away," she said. "Please." He didn't do anything. "Please, mister." Behind us, Diane's voice cut across the lobby. "Someone hold the child back. She is not to interfere with security while they do their job." A staff member actually stepped toward Lily, reaching for her arm, as though my 8-year-old daughter were part of some crime in progress. That was the moment my calm finally broke. 6 years of swallowing every insult, of teaching Lily to give people the benefit of the doubt, of being the reasonable one in every room, all of it reached its limit at the sight of a stranger's hand moving toward my child. I turned, and for the first time that morning my voice came out hard and low. "Do not touch my daughter," I said. "Nobody puts a hand on her. Do you understand me?" The staff member froze. And in that instant, I watched Diane Prescott's face change, not into fear, but into something like satisfaction. She had been handed exactly what she wanted. She turned to the parents holding up their phones and gestured toward me as though I were an exhibit. "You see that?" she said. "That is precisely the kind of aggression I've been warning about. This is why we have standards. This is why we screen these families carefully." And just like that, I understood the trap I was standing in. Every word I spoke, every move I made, was being filtered through a story that had already been written before I walked in. My calm had been read as the smooth manipulation of a con artist. Now my instinct to protect my own child was being twisted into proof that I was violent. There was no version of myself I could offer that room that would not be bent to fit the frame Diane had built. So I did the only thing I could. I lowered my voice back down, slow and deliberate, and I brought both of my hands up where everyone could see them, open and empty. I drew Lily close against my leg and kept her there, and I made myself perfectly, visibly harmless. I had to calculate the position of my own body just to be permitted to exist in that lobby without being called a danger. And I knew, even in the middle of it, that not one of those parents recording me had ever once had to do the same. From behind the reception desk, Rachel Doyle stepped out again. I could see the fear on her face, but she came out anyway. "Her file still shows approved," she said, loud enough to carry. "It's right here in the district system. I can call the central office directly, right now, and they'll confirm it in 30 seconds. Please, just let me make the call." Diane rounded on her. "If you touch that phone, Miss Doyle, you will not have a job here tomorrow. Is that clear?" I watched a young woman weigh her own paycheck against a stranger's dignity, and I saw the cost of it move across her face. She had bills, surely, a life that depended on this job, and Diane had just put all of it on the table. Rachel's hand stayed near the phone, shaking, and I will never forget that she did not fully back down even then. She simply stood there, refusing to return to her station, a small and stubborn act of decency in a room full of silence, because that was the thing that struck me hardest. The parents kept filming. A dozen glowing screens all pointed at me, and not one of them said a single word in my defense. They watched a father and his crying daughter be marched towards the door on the word of a woman who had never even opened the file, and they recorded it, and they said nothing. Lily looked around that lobby, at all those adult faces lit by phone screens, and she asked the question loudly so everyone could hear it. "Why won't anybody tell her my daddy didn't do anything wrong?" A few of them looked down at the floor. Bradley Vance, the man in the gray overcoat who had started it all, studied his own shoes. Nobody answered her. Not one person in that entire room could meet the eyes of an 8-year-old girl and answer her honest question. And standing there, I realized this was no longer about an admission letter. It was no longer even about Hawthorne. My daughter was watching a room full of grown adults choose silence, while an injustice happened right in front of them, and she was learning something about the world that I had spent her whole life trying to keep from her. That was the wound. Not the red stamp on the file, but the lesson forming behind her eyes. We were maybe 6 steps from the front doors when they opened. Dr. Gerald Hartman walked in, and behind him came 3 members of the District Education Board, all of them in dark suits, all of them there for the private 10 o'clock meeting that not one person in that lobby knew anything about. Hartman was the superintendent of the entire Maple Hollow district. He was Diane Prescott's boss, and he had come to Hawthorne to sign a partnership worth $120 million with a man named Bennett. He stopped just inside the doors and took in the scene. He saw me being escorted out by a security guard. He saw Lily crying against my leg. He saw a stack of admission papers scattered across the reception counter with the word "rejected" stamped in red across the top page. His eyes went from Frank Dolan's hand on my shoulder to Diane and back to my face, and the color drained out of him completely. He crossed the lobby in quick strides, and he spoke in a voice loud enough for the whole corridor to hear. "Mr. Bennett!" "Sir, what in God's name is happening here?" Frank Dolan's hand came off my shoulder as if he had touched a stove. For a moment, the entire lobby went still, all those phones still recording, but the mood in the room turning over on itself like a wave. Diane stepped forward, and I could hear the confusion creeping into her voice as she tried to explain herself. "Dr. Hartman, I've just prevented a serious case of admission fraud. This man was using forged documents, and he became aggressive with my staff, so I—" "Do you have any idea," Hartman said, cutting straight across her, "who this man is? Do you know who you have just had dragged toward the door?" Diane opened her mouth, and nothing came out. For the first time that morning, she had no answer ready. Hartman turned so that the board members and the watching parents could all hear him clearly. This is Marcus Bennett. He is the founder of the Bennett Education Foundation. The science wing your students walk through every day was built with his money. The scholarships half this district runs on came from his foundation. And he is the one man whose signature this board has been waiting on to approve a $120 million agreement that was scheduled to be signed in this building at 10 o'clock this morning. I heard someone near the back of the crowd draw a sharp breath. And as for the fraud you claim to have prevented, Hartman went on, his voice tight with anger. His daughter's file is entirely legitimate. She passed the entrance exam on her own merit. She was approved by the district admissions office before you ever laid eyes on her. There was nothing to prevent, Diane. There was only a child to welcome, and you failed to do it. The reversal moved through that lobby like a change in the weather. The parents who had been filming a con man began, one by one, to lower their phones. The staff who had watched me be marched down the hall suddenly could not look at me at all, and Bradley Vance, the man whose ugly little comment had given everyone permission to suspect me, stood very still and stared down at the floor, his face gone red to the ears. I looked at him for just a second, long enough to see the shame land on a real human face, and then I looked away, because I had no more room in me for him. Hartman crouched down, lowering himself until he was level with Lily's eyes, the way I had done at the counter an hour earlier. "Young lady," he said gently, "I am so sorry. You came here today because you earned your place, and you were treated in a way that no child should ever be treated, in a school that is my responsibility. I am sorry. That is not who we are supposed to be." Lily just nodded, still hiccuping from crying, and pressed closer to me. I waited for Diane to break. I waited for the apology, for some flicker of understanding to cross her face now that the whole thing had come apart in front of her superior. It never came. She lifted her chin instead. And what she said told me she had learned nothing at all. "With respect, Dr. Hartman, Mr. Bennett should have identified himself the moment he walked in," she said. "If a man is a major donor, he has no business dressing like that or showing up unannounced. How was I supposed to know? He created this confusion himself." I felt something cold and clear settle over me. I looked at her. This woman who still, even now, believed she had only been doing her job. And I asked her the question that had been building in my chest since the moment she stamped my daughter's name in red. "Does a father have to be rich or famous," I said, "before his child deserves to be treated with basic decency?" She had no answer for that either. She fell back on the only shield she had left. "I was following our admissions process," she said stiffly. Hartman reached over to the counter and picked up the rejected file, holding it up so she could see her own red stamp across my daughter's name. "Show me," he said. "Show me the process that allows a principal to overturn a district decision on her own authority without making a single phone call to verify anything. Show me where that's written down, Diane. I'll wait." She could not, because it did not exist, and she knew it, and finally her mouth closed and stayed closed. Hartman was not finished with her. He told her, quietly now, that she was to hand over her staff badge and her office keys, and that she was not to touch a school computer while the district conducted an investigation. He said it the way you say something you have already decided, and 2 board members moved to stand near her, not touching her, simply present. And that was when Diane made her worst mistake of the day. While everyone's attention was fixed on me, on Hartman, on Lily, she slipped back toward the reception desk. I only noticed because Rachel noticed first. Diane leaned over the keyboard, trying to delete the note she had added to Lily's file, a note I would only read about later, describing me as a parent who threatened staff and posed a fraud risk. She was trying to erase the evidence of what she had done, while the rest of us stood 10 feet away. Rachel stepped in front of the monitor and put her hand over it. "Don't," she said. "Don't you dare delete that." Then she raised her voice and looked at Hartman. "Dr. Hartman, she's trying to erase her own notes on the file. and the security cameras have recorded everything that happened this morning. All of it. Diane was suspended on the spot. One of the board members walked her toward her office to collect her personal things, and the lobby seemed to exhale as she went. Her attempt to hide what she had done, in front of a dozen witnesses and a lens on every wall, had condemned her far more completely than any speech of mine ever could. But the story did not end when Diane Prescott walked out of that lobby. In some ways, it was only beginning. The security footage did not stay inside Hawthorne. By that afternoon, someone had shared it, and within a few hours it had spread across the entire country. Millions of people watched a principal throw a little girl's file onto a counter, watched her mock a father in a worn coat, watched an 8-year-old ask a room full of adults why no one would speak up for her dad. The clip was everywhere before the school day had even ended. And once the country knew my name, it did not take long for reporters to learn the rest. They discovered that I was not only a major donor, but a single father who had quietly spent years funding scholarships and programs for thousands of children in exactly the situation Lily and I appeared to be in. The contrast between the man in the video and the man behind the foundation made the story burn even hotter. Then something happened that I had not expected, and that changed everything for me. Other people began to come forward. A former Hawthorne employee called the district office in tears. She told them she had once watched Diane deliberately stall the file of a low-income family for weeks, inventing paperwork that the rules did not require, until the family gave up and enrolled their son somewhere else. She had known it was wrong at the time, she said, and she had stayed silent because she was terrified of losing her job, and she had carried that silence for 2 years. A mother appeared on the local news holding a complaint she had filed against Diane Prescott a long time before. She had accused the principal of pushing her daughter to the bottom of a wait list while wealthier children moved ahead, and she had written it all down and sent it to the school, and no one had ever written back. Her letter had simply gone unanswered, filed away, and forgotten. From those broken pieces, and the ones that followed, the country began to assemble a picture that was much larger than one bad morning. Diane had demanded documents the rules never called for. She had quietly moved the children of wealthy donors up the wait list while other families waited. She had written poisonous notes into the files of any parent who dared to question her, and she had leaned on her own staff to make sure their complaints never traveled any higher than her desk. For years, apparently, this had been the machinery humming quietly under the polished floors of Hawthorne, and no one had been able to stop it. Frank Dolan came forward too. The heavy-set guard who had walked me down that corridor gave a statement, admitting that from the very first moment, his gut had told him the order to remove me was wrong. He had felt it, and he had done it anyway, because he was afraid, and he wanted to say so out loud. I thought about the way his hand had left my shoulder the instant Hartman said my name, and I understood that Frank was not a cruel man. He was a frightened one, and the difference matters more than we like to admit. What had begun as the story of one unprofessional principal had become something else entirely. It was no longer about Diane Prescott. It was evidence that a whole system had been quietly letting prejudice and silence decide the futures of children, and dressing it up as standards and process the entire time. That night, when Lily and I finally got home, she was quiet in a way that scared me more than her crying had. I made her dinner, and she moved her food around the plate, and just before bed, she looked up at me with an expression far too serious for 8 years old. "Daddy," she said, "if they hadn't found out that you were the one who helped build the school, would they have let me in?" I opened my mouth to answer her, and I could not. Every reassuring thing I had ready to say died before it reached my lips, because she deserved the truth. And the truth was that I did not know. Worse than that, I did know, and the answer was no. That single question turned my whole victory to ash in my mouth. Lily had been rescued because her father happened to be powerful. She would walk into Hawthorne now, not because a room full of adults had recognized her worth, but because a superintendent had recognized my name. And every other child that Diane Prescott had ever turned away, every family whose complaint had gone unanswered, none of them had a Marcus Bennett walking through the door at the right moment. They had simply been turned away. And no one had ever come. I sat with that question for 3 days, and it would not let me sleep. It reached all the way back to a boy standing in a fine lobby watching a receptionist look at his father's janitor uniform, the boy who had made himself a promise. I had built a foundation worth billions on the belief that a child should be measured by her heart and her mind, and my own daughter had just shown me, in a single sentence, that all my money had done was buy her a seat at a table that would still turn other children away. On the 3rd day, they came to my house with an offer. A lawyer for the district arrived, along with 2 members of the education board, and they sat in my living room and laid out something they clearly considered generous. Lily's place at Hawthorne would be guaranteed. All of her tuition and every extracurricular activity, including that astronomy club, would be fully covered, free of charge. The school would issue a public apology. Diane Prescott would be formally terminated, and I would be given the right to put my name on the new science wing. In return, all they asked was that I go ahead and sign the $120 million agreement as planned, and that I make no further public statements about any of the misconduct that had been uncovered. One of the board members, a silver-haired man who spoke with the smoothness of someone used to closing deals, leaned forward to make their reasoning plain. Mr. Bennett, firing Principal Prescott, addresses the problem. She was one person who behaved badly, and she's gone. There's no reason to drag the good name of the whole school through the mud over the actions of a single individual. Think of the students. Think of what a prolonged scandal does to them. I understood exactly what they were doing. They wanted to draw a neat circle around Diane, to call her one bad apple, so that no one would have to look at the barrel. They would give my daughter everything, and in exchange the drawer full of ignored complaints would stay shut forever. And so I sat in my own living room facing the hardest choice of my life. I could pull my funding entirely. I could walk away, tear up the agreement, and let the district scramble in the wreckage. It would be the fastest, sharpest revenge available to me, and part of me wanted it badly. But if I did that, thousands of innocent students would lose the programs and scholarships that money was meant to build. Children who had done nothing wrong except attend the schools these people ran. Or I could accept the offer. I could guarantee my daughter a bright, protected future, sign the papers, and let all of it disappear. Lily would be safe. And the machinery under the floor would keep humming, and the next family without a famous name would be turned away in the quiet, exactly as before. Both roads led to the same dead end, because neither one of them answered my daughter's question. If I only saved Lily, then children without a powerful father would still be turned away. And if I burned the whole thing down, then the innocent would pay for the guilty right alongside them. I looked at the lawyer and the board members sitting comfortably on my couch, waiting for me to take the easy exit they had so carefully prepared. And something finally became clear to me. I could not simply close the door on this school and walk away clean. That would only protect my own child and my own conscience, and leave the door exactly as broken as I had found it. If I was going to do anything worth doing, I could not just close that door. I had to find a way to force it open and to keep it open for every child who came after Lily. I told the lawyer and the 2 board members that I would not be signing anything that day. I refused every private privilege they had offered for Lily, the free tuition, the name on the science wing, all of it. Then I told them the $120 million agreement would go forward only if the district accepted a complete reform of how it admitted children, and I asked them to bring the full board to the table because I intended to say the rest of it to their faces. A week later, I stood at the head of a long conference table in the district building with the entire education board watching me, and I did not raise my voice once. I had learned that lesson in the Hawthorne lobby. Instead, I told them about the stack of papers with my daughter's name stamped in red, and I said that no child should ever be erased in the dark by one person's opinion. every rejection of an already approved file, I told them, would now require a second administrator to review it, and no principal would ever again strike a student's name on her own authority without evidence and independent verification. I thought of the mother on the news, holding the complaint no one had answered for 2 years, and I told them that silence was going to end. The entire admissions process would be audited by an outside organization. The waitlists and the selection criteria would be made public, so no child could be quietly moved down while another was moved up. Every family would have the right to appeal, and every complaint would go to an independent office that did not answer to the principal, so that no parent's letter would ever be buried and forgotten again. Then I thought of Rachel Doyle standing in front of that monitor with her hand shaking, risking her paycheck to protect a stranger, and I thought of Frank Dolan, who had felt the wrongness of that order in his gut and followed it anyway because he was afraid. I told the board that people who reported misconduct would be protected from retaliation, and that every teacher, every administrator, every guard would be trained to recognize a discriminatory order and to refuse it. No one, I said, should ever have to choose between their conscience and their job the way those two had. Finally, I told them the part that mattered most to me. Every file Diane Prescott had ever rejected would be pulled and reviewed again. The school would have staff dedicated to helping single parents and low-income families, and the rights of students and parents would be posted in plain sight, right there in the admissions area where my daughter had been humiliated. And I asked them to establish something new, which I called the Open Door Fund, to provide scholarships, transportation, meals, and after-school care for children being raised in single-parent homes. The board did not take it quietly. Several of them objected that my conditions were too broad and far too expensive. One man argued that the district could not possibly audit itself to the standard I was describing. Another tried a softer pressure, reminding me, almost gently, that Lily's own place at Hawthorne might become complicated if I insisted on turning a personal grievance into a public war with the district. This isn't a personal grievance, I told him, and it stopped being about getting Lily into Hawthorne the moment my daughter asked me whether they would have let her in if I were poor. I already know the answer. So do you. I am not here to buy one seat for one child. I am here to make sure that no principal in this district can ever again decide a child's future by looking at what her father is wearing. The room went quiet, and then Gerald Hartman spoke up from the far end of the table. He said that the district had failed, plainly and without excuses, when it let those earlier complaints die unanswered, and that he would not be part of burying another one. He stood with me. And between the pressure of a country that had watched the video, the investigation already underway, and the very real prospect of losing the largest single investment in the district's history, the board finally agreed to all of it. The weeks that followed reshaped Hawthorne from the inside out. Diane Prescott was terminated, and she lost the certification that would have let her hold an administrative post anywhere else. Several families who had been turned away over the years filed a discrimination suit against her, and the leaders who had let their complaints gather dust found themselves under investigation as well. I heard, near the end, that she still insisted she had only been protecting the school's standards, that she never once understood what she had actually done. I did not find any satisfaction in that. Prejudice that cannot even recognize itself is a hard thing to watch, and it does not die easily. Rachel Doyle was promoted to lead the admissions office, and the first task she was given was to reopen every file Diane had ever rejected. One by one, families who had been pushed away unfairly were contacted and offered a real chance, some of them years after they had given up hope. I thought that was exactly right. The young woman who had refused to return to her station was now the one holding the door. Frank Dolan kept his job. Once the cameras confirmed he had never used force against me, but he was required to complete training on how to refuse an unlawful order. When he finally came to see me, he could barely meet my eyes. I knew it was wrong the second she said it, he told me, and I did it anyway. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bennett." "I believe you," I said, "and I meant it. What matters to me isn't that you were afraid that morning. Every person in that lobby was afraid of something. What matters is what you do the next time you feel that same wrongness in your gut. That's the only part that's still up to you. Gerald Hartman issued a public apology, not just to me and to Lily, but to every family the district had ever failed. And the $120 million agreement was signed at last, except the money no longer flowed only into new buildings. A large share of it went instead into scholarships, transportation, meals, counseling, and after-school care for single-parent families. And I insisted that the very first program launch at Hawthorne itself, the same school that had tried to push my daughter and me out its doors. 3 months later, Lily and I drove back to Hawthorne Preparatory Academy on the first day of school. I was still driving the same old sedan, and I was still wearing the same coat I had worn for nearly 10 years. I had not changed a single thing about how I looked in order to earn anyone's respect, because the whole point had been that I should never have needed to. But the school itself had changed. A staff member greeted us warmly the moment we walked in, and near the entrance stood a clear posted notice listing the rights of every student and parent, with the phone number of the Independent Complaints Office printed right beneath it. Families of every kind moved through the lobby that morning, and not one of them was being asked to prove that they somehow fit the image of the place. Rachel Doyle came out to meet us in her new role, and she handed Lily her official student badge with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Frank Dolan stood near the door, and when he saw us, he gave a small, honest nod, the kind of greeting that carries an apology inside it without needing any words. Even Bradley Vance was there, dropping off a child of his own, and when he caught my eye across the lobby, he dipped his head once, quietly, the shame of that morning still visible on his face. I nodded back. It was enough. Then Lily noticed something. Across the lobby, another single father was bringing his son in to enroll, a nervous man glancing down at his boy's plain clothes and worn backpack, the way you do when you are bracing to be judged for them. But the admissions clerk welcomed the two of them with the same warmth we had just received, and the man's shoulders came down from around his ears. Lily watched them for a moment, then looked up at me. "Is that why you didn't close the school down, Daddy?" I looked at the families walking freely through those doors, the doors that had nearly closed on us 3 months before. And I gave her the answer I had been carrying since the night she first asked me her hardest question. "Closing a door is easy, sweetheart," I told her. "Keeping it open for every child, that's the hard part. That's the part worth doing." Before she went to her classroom, someone from the office brought over the very first acceptance letter issued to a student supported by the Open Door Fund. They placed it in Lily's hands, and she carried it across the lobby and gave it to the nervous boy whose single father was still filling out forms at the counter. She just handed it to him, the way you hand someone something that was always meant to be theirs, and then she smiled at him. Watching her do that, I understood that my daughter had finally learned the thing I had spent her whole life trying to teach her. It was never the money that made me matter. I had held enough power that morning to burn the entire district to the ground for what it did to us, and any court in the country would have understood the impulse. What mattered was that I had used that power instead to make sure the children who came after Lily would never have to endure what she had endured in that lobby. I watched her walk into her classroom with her chin up and a confident smile on her face, the astronomy club schedule already folded in her pocket. Then I quietly left the school, just a father in a well-worn coat, the same one who had held her hand, and walked into this place 3 months earlier with no idea what was waiting for us. So let me leave you with the question I have carried ever since. If you had been standing in that hallway that morning, watching a father and his little girl be marched toward the door on the word of a woman who never even opened the file, what would you have done? Would you have lifted your phone and filmed it like everyone else? Or would you have been the first one to speak up? Because here is the only thing I know for certain now. A child does not need wealthy, powerful, or famous parents to deserve walking into a school through the front door. My real victory did not come the moment Diane Prescott's supervisor called me sir. It came the day every child after Lily was finally treated as though they had belonged there all along. If this story moved you, if you believe every child deserves to walk through that door with their head held high, do me one small favor before you go. Subscribe and follow the channel and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. The more of us who refuse to stay silent in that hallway, the fewer children who will ever have to ask why nobody spoke up. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.